The silver necklace hit the wooden counter with a sound so small it should have meant nothing. But every person in that store heard it. Evelyn Carter did not flinch. She kept her chin level, her hands steady, her eyes fixed on the man behind the counter, who was already smiling the way cruel men smile when they believe they cannot be touched. "You want me to take this?" Walter Grayson picked it up between two fingers like something he'd scraped off his boot. "Honey, this thing ain't worth the nail I'd hang it on." The laughter started slow. Then it filled the room. Evelyn breathed through it. She had survived worse than laughter. But she had never stood in a room full of strangers and felt so completely, devastatingly alone. If this story reaches your heart the way I believe it will, I want you to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button and stay with Evelyn all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Willow Creek, Colorado. Summer of 1884. And the moment everything changed. The necklace had belonged to her mother. That was the part Evelyn never said out loud, because saying it would have meant explaining everything. The fever that took her mother in March. The creditors who came in April. The eldest brother who sold the house in May and told her she was old enough to manage on her own. She was 24 years old, and she had exactly one travel bag, one change of clothes, one letter from the Willow Creek School Board offering her a position as teaching assistant, and one silver necklace that her mother had worn every single day of her adult life. She was not going to explain any of that to Walter Grayson. She simply needed flour-dried beans, a small tin of salt, and matches. Enough to last her until the school term began in 2 weeks. That was all. That was the entire transaction she had walked through the door to complete. "You got coin?" Walter asked before she had finished speaking. "I have the necklace," Evelyn said. "It's sterling silver. It belonged to my—" "I didn't ask you its history, miss. I asked if you got coin." The store was not large. There were maybe 8 people inside, a woman selecting ribbon near the window, 2 men talking quietly near the seed sacks, an older couple by the door who had stopped moving the moment Walter's tone shifted. They were all listening now. Evelyn could feel it the way you feel weather changing before the clouds arrive. "I don't have coin," she said carefully. "But the necklace is worth considerably more than what I'm asking for. You could hold it, sell it, do whatever you like with—" "Hold it." Walter set down the tin he'd been stacking and looked at her with the kind of flat assessing look that men like him reserved for animals they were deciding weren't worth buying. "You want me to hold a dead woman's jewelry as collateral for a bag of beans? For flour and beans and—" "No." The woman near the ribbon had stopped pretending to look at the ribbon. "I have a letter." Evelyn tried. "From the school board. I begin teaching in 2 weeks and I will have— letters don't buy merchandise." "I understand that. I'm asking you to extend credit for 2 weeks based on guaranteed—" "You know what I see." Walter leaned forward on the counter, and his voice dropped into something almost conversational, the way a man gets when he's decided to enjoy himself. "I see a woman who showed up in my town with nothing. No husband, no family, no money, just a worn-out bag, and a sad story about a dead mother's necklace, and some letter nobody here has seen." He spread his hands. "That's what I see." Evelyn felt the heat move up the back of her neck. Not shame. She had decided years ago that shame was a luxury she could not afford. What she felt was something older and steadier than shame. Something that lived beneath her ribs and told her to stand still. "Then I'll take the necklace back," she said quietly, "and I'll find another establishment." "There ain't another establishment." Walter smiled. "Just mine." The laughter came from the 2 men near the seed sacks. Light and careless, the way men laugh when they've decided a situation has nothing to do with them. Evelyn reached for the necklace. Walter pulled it back an inch. Just an inch, just enough. "Where'd you say you came from?" he asked. "I didn't." "Because women who travel alone and show up without coin and without family—" He paused to let the room fill in whatever it wanted to fill in. "They usually got a reason for traveling alone." "I have a position at the school," Evelyn said. "That is the only reason any person needs to travel anywhere." If that letter's real, it's real. Then you won't mind if I hold on to this. He tapped the necklace on the counter, while I send a boy up to the school board to verify your story. Evelyn looked at him. She understood exactly what was happening. The school board office was a 40-minute ride each direction. The boy would not be sent today, maybe not tomorrow. And while she waited, she would have nothing. Give me back my mother's necklace, she said. Soon as I verify that necklace is mine, and it has nothing to do with a credit arrangement that you have already refused. Give it back. Walter looked at her for a long moment. Then he set the necklace on the counter between them and tapped it once with one finger. Worthless anyway, he said. Same as the woman who owned it before you. The room went completely silent. Even the laughter was gone now, replaced by something heavier. The kind of quiet that comes when cruelty has reached its final destination and everyone in the room knows it, and nobody is going to say so. Evelyn picked up the necklace. Her hand was not shaking. She made certain of that. She turned to leave. She had 3 steps to the door when a voice came from behind her, low and unhurried, with the particular stillness of a man who never raises his voice because he has never needed to. I'll cover whatever she needs. Evelyn stopped. She had not noticed the man near the doorway. He was tall, the kind of tall that a room adjusts to without quite knowing it, with a canvas jacket, worn pale at the elbows, and a hat pushed back on his head, and eyes that were looking at Walter Grayson, the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. He walked to the counter without looking at Evelyn, pulled a money clip from his jacket, and set down more than enough. Flour, he said to Walter, dried beans, salt, matches. He paused. And whatever else she needs. Walter did not move immediately. He looked at the money, then at the man, then back at the money. Something in his face recalculated. Caleb, he said carefully, this ain't really your... I know what it is and what it ain't. Caleb Walker did not look away. Fill the order. Evelyn turned slowly. She did not know what she had expected, someone younger, maybe, or angrier, or somebody who knew her and was making a point. Not this. Not a stranger filling a stranger's order like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Walter filled the order in silence. When he slid the goods across the counter, Caleb carried the bag to Evelyn and held it out to her. Up close, he was older than she'd first thought, 30, maybe 32, with the kind of weathered face that comes not from age, but from years of weather and silence in equal measure. You don't have to do this, Evelyn said. I know. I have a position at the school. I'll have wages in 2 weeks. I can repay. No need. She looked at him directly. I don't accept charity. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not offense. Something quieter than offense. It ain't charity, he said. It's just groceries. She took the bag. She had to because her hands were shaking now. Not in front of Walter. She had held steady in front of Walter, but now in front of a stranger who had simply treated her like a person. Her hands were shaking, and she was furious at them for it. Thank you, she said, and her voice was perfectly level, because she had years of practice keeping her voice level when everything else was not. Caleb Walker nodded once and stepped aside to let her through the door. She was halfway down the wooden sidewalk when she heard his boots behind her. Miss. She stopped but didn't turn. That letter you mentioned. A pause. From the school board. It's real, she said. I believe you. Another pause longer this time. But you might want to know that Franklin Holt, he runs the board. He's been out of town since last Wednesday. Won't be back till end of the week. Evelyn turned now. Caleb was standing with his hat in his hands, which was the first uncertain thing she had seen him do. I mention it, he said, because if anyone gives you trouble about verifying your position before he gets back, you can tell them Caleb Walker vouches for you being a legitimate traveler with legitimate business in this town. My word carries some weight around here. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Why? She said. Why what? Why does any of this concern you? He put his hat back on and looked past her for a moment toward the mountains that sat heavy and blue on the horizon. "Because nobody said a word in there," he said finally. 8 people. And not one of them said a word. He touched the brim of his hat. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Carter," she said. "Evelyn Carter." "Miss Carter." A pause. "I hope the town treats you better than it did this morning." He walked away. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk holding her groceries and watching Caleb Walker disappear around the corner, and she thought about the 8 people who had watched Walter Grayson hold her mother's necklace over the counter and call it worthless, and not one of them had moved. And she thought about one man who had. She did not know yet what Caleb Walker's involvement in her life would cost him. She did not know that the missing school letter was already missing, that it had been taken, not lost, and by someone who had very specific reasons for not wanting Evelyn Carter in Willow Creek at all. She did not know that what had happened in that store this morning was not the beginning of her trouble. It was the warning. But she knew one thing clearly standing there on that sidewalk in the summer heat with her mother's silver necklace warm against her palm. She was not going to run. She had run before, and it had cost her everything. She had run from her brother's house, and from her previous town, and from every place that had made her feel like she had no right to take up space in it. She was not going to run from Willow Creek. Whatever Walter Grayson was trying to accomplish, whatever the town had decided about her in the 10 minutes she'd spent inside that store, whatever came next, Evelyn Carter was going to stand in the middle of it and find out exactly what she was made of. She held her mother's necklace in her fist, and she walked toward the sound of children playing near the schoolhouse at the end of the road. The schoolhouse was smaller than Evelyn had imagined. She had pictured something solid, something that announced itself with authority, the way schools in the East did, with painted shutters and a proper bell tower and a sign above the door that told the world this was a place where minds were shaped and futures were decided. What she found at the end of the road was a low timber building with a crooked door and a window on the left side that someone had patched with oilcloth instead of replacing the glass. There were 8 small desks visible through the gap in the door. Someone had carved initials into the frame, deep, deliberate marks the kind children make when they want proof they existed somewhere. Evelyn stood in front of it for a long moment. Then she pushed the door open and walked inside. It smelled like chalk dust and pine resin, and something older underneath both of those things. Years of children sitting in rows, learning to read and cipher and hold a pen correctly, years of small voices repeating things back until the words became permanent. She walked to the front of the room and stood where the teacher would stand facing the empty desks, and for the first time since the stage had dropped her off at the edge of Willow Creek that morning, she felt something close to calm. This was why she had come. Not for Walter Grayson, not for the town's opinion of her, not even for Caleb Walker's quiet act of decency on a dusty sidewalk. She had come because she was good at this, at standing in front of children and making the world make sense to them, and she had not been allowed to do it in 14 months, and she was not going to let a shopkeeper with a mean mouth and cold eyes take it from her before she had even started. She set her bag down on the teacher's desk. She opened it and unpacked her things with the careful economy of someone who had learned to make a small space feel like home. The worn grammar book, the notebook with her lesson plans, the tin of pencils she'd sharpened herself on the coach, the photograph of her mother that she kept folded between the last 2 pages of the grammar book so it would not bend. She did not hear the footsteps until they were already at the door. "You can't be in here." She turned. A boy stood in the doorway, 12, maybe 13, with red hair, and the particular kind of defiant posture that boys that age cultivate when they're trying to decide whether to be afraid of something or not. "I'm the new teaching assistant," Evelyn said. "I begin the fall term." "Miss Hargrove says nobody's allowed inside between terms." "Miss Hargrove is the current teacher." The boy said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. "Well," Evelyn said, "Miss Hargrove isn't here, and I am, and I'm not damaging anything. I'm simply looking at the room." She paused. "What's your name?" "Thomas." "Thomas, do you attend school here?" He shifted his weight. "When my pa can spare me." "And when your pa can't spare you?" I worked the supply line with him, hauling freight up to the mining camps. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. He had ink stains on his right hand. The deliberate kind, not accidental someone who had been practicing letters on his own, away from a school that he couldn't always attend. "Those initials on the doorframe," she said. "TM." Thomas went very still. "Those yours?" He said nothing. "There's no trouble in it," Evelyn said. "I just noticed. You carved them deep, like you wanted to make certain they stayed." The boy looked at her with an expression she recognized, the careful, measuring look of someone who has been surprised by kindness before and learned not to trust it immediately. "My ma used to say school was the one place that couldn't be taken away," he said finally. "On account of it lives in your head after." "Your ma was right," Evelyn said. Thomas looked at the floor, then back at her. "Mr. Grayson says you're not really a teacher. He told my pa this morning you were probably running from something." The words landed cleanly the way a slap does when you don't see it coming. But Evelyn kept her expression level. "Mr. Grayson doesn't know anything about me," she said. "He knows most things in this town." "Most things," Evelyn agreed. "Not all things. There's a difference." Thomas considered this with the seriousness that only children and very honest adults ever bring to considering things. "Are you?" he asked. "Running from something?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I'm running toward something," she said. "That's a different thing entirely." She did not know then that Thomas Malone's father would be one of the men Walter Grayson had spent years quietly indebting to himself. She did not know that the boy standing in the doorway with ink on his hands and his mother's words living somewhere behind his eyes would become, in the weeks that followed, one of the clearest pieces of evidence that Walter's control over this town went far deeper than one cruel morning in a general store. She did not know any of that yet, but Thomas nodded once with the gravity of someone deciding something and said, "I'll tell Miss Hargrove you were here respectful." Then he left. Evelyn stood alone in the schoolroom and listened to his footsteps fade, and she thought about what Caleb Walker had said on the sidewalk, because nobody said a word in there, and she wondered how long a town had to practice silence before silence became its natural language. She was about to repack her bag when she heard another set of footsteps. Heavier, deliberate. She turned. It was not Caleb. It was a woman 50 perhaps, with iron gray hair pulled back severely, and the kind of upright carriage that comes from decades of believing posture is a moral statement. She stopped in the doorway and looked at Evelyn with an expression that was not quite hostile and not quite welcoming, and occupied that narrow, uncomfortable territory between both. "You're the Carter woman," she said. "I'm Evelyn Carter. Yes." "Margaret Holt. My husband Franklin is the head of the school board." She paused to let that land. "He's been away." "I know. I was told." Margaret stepped inside. She moved through the room with the proprietary ease of someone who had spent years being important in a small place. She looked at Evelyn's things arranged on the desk, the grammar book, the notebook, the tin of pencils, and her expression did something complicated. "Walter Grayson came to my house an hour ago," she said. Evelyn said nothing. "He told me what happened at the store." Margaret stopped near the window and looked out through the patched oilcloth, though there was nothing to see through it. "He said you were trying to pass off costume jewelry as sterling silver. He said you became aggressive when he refused. That's not what happened." "I know." Evelyn blinked. Margaret turned from the window and looked at her with the direct, assessing gaze of a woman who had been evaluating other women her entire life and had become very accurate at it. "I've known Walter Grayson for 20 years, she said. "I know what his version of events sounds like. I also know what a woman looks like who's just arrived in a strange town and has been publicly humiliated." She paused. "You look like the second thing." Evelyn felt something release in her chest. Very small, very quiet. The specific relief of being seen accurately by someone who didn't need to offer it. "My husband wrote that letter," Margaret said. "The position is real. You have a place here." She hesitated. "But I want you to understand something." "Tell me." "Walter Grayson is not simply an unpleasant man. He is an unpleasant man with considerable influence, and a very long memory. What happened this morning, you refusing to be pushed out. Caleb Walker stepping in, that will not sit well with him. I'm not leaving, Evelyn said. I'm not asking you to. Margaret looked at her steadily. I'm asking you to be careful. Careful of what, specifically? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My husband has been trying to finalize the fall school schedule for 2 months. Twice paperwork has gone missing from his office. Once a letter he was expecting from the county education board arrived opened and resealed poorly, so he noticed. She paused. We don't know who, but we know it's not random. Evelyn felt the first cold thread of something she could not yet name move through her. Why would anyone interfere with school board correspondence? She said. That, Margaret said, is the right question. She picked up her gloves from where she'd set them on the nearest desk. My husband will be back Friday. Come to the house for supper Saturday. He'll want to meet you properly. She moved toward the door. Mrs. Holt, Evelyn said. Margaret paused. Thank you for coming. The older woman looked back at her with an expression that was not quite soft and not quite hard. Don't thank me yet, she said. Thank me when you're still here in October. She left. Evelyn stood in the schoolroom for a long time after that, turning the conversation over, and the morning over, and the weight of all of it. The necklace on the counter, Walter's smile, Caleb's voice, Thomas's ink-stained hands, Margaret's warning until the pieces began to arrange themselves into a shape she didn't like. Opened letters, missing paperwork, a position that someone might not want filled. She thought about the letter in her travel bag, the original one, the one she'd received in her previous town 6 weeks ago, the one she'd been careful to keep. She crossed to the desk and opened the bag and pulled out the envelope. She unfolded the letter. She read it again slowly. The date, the signature, the specific language of the offer. Then she looked at the postmark on the envelope. Something was wrong. She had not noticed it when the letter arrived because she had been in the middle of packing and grief and the logistics of leaving. But now, standing in the empty schoolhouse with Margaret Holt's words still in the air, she noticed it clearly. The postmark was 3 days earlier than the date on the letter itself, which meant the letter had been mailed before it was written, which was impossible. Unless someone had sent a duplicate, an earlier draft perhaps, or a copy, and Franklin Holt had sent the original separately, and the one she was holding was not the one he had written. She folded it back carefully and stood very still thinking. Someone had sent her a letter that looked real enough to bring her to Willow Creek. Someone had made certain she arrived. And then she was beginning to suspect someone had made certain her arrival would be met with exactly the kind of reception that would make her leave again immediately. Not to stop her from coming, to stop her from staying. She was still standing there, turning this over in her mind, when she heard a third set of footsteps outside the schoolhouse. These were different from Thomas's, and different from Margaret's, unhurried but with purpose in them, the particular sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going, and had decided to go there. Caleb Walker appeared in the doorway. He looked at her for a moment, without speaking, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he communicated. He waited until he had something worth saying. I heard Margaret Holt walk down here, he said. She did. She give you any trouble? She gave me information. Evelyn paused. And a supper invitation. She looked at him. How did you know she came? Small town, he said. Things move fast. He came inside and she noticed he kept near the door. The instinct of a man who was accustomed to small spaces and cautious about committing to them. You should know something, Oro, he said. After you left the store this morning, I stayed. To speak to Walter. To listen. He paused. Walter made 2 remarks after you left. First one was to the room generally said a woman like you always ends up causing problems for decent people, and anyone who helped you was asking for the same. He paused. Second one was quieter. He said it to Jim Pratt, one of his men, and I almost missed it. He said, make sure she doesn't find Holt before I do. Evelyn felt the cold thread again, sharper now. He wants to reach Franklin Holt before I can speak to him, she said. That's what it sounded like. Why? Caleb looked at her in a way that suggested he had a theory he wasn't entirely sure he should share. "Say it," Evelyn said. "There's a land survey coming through in the fall," he said. "Railroad expansion. The county sent preliminary notices 2 months ago about which parcels would be assessed for right-of-way easements." He paused. "The school sits on a corner lot, County Parcel 47. Evelyn understood before he finished. "If the school closes," she said slowly, "or if the position goes unfilled long enough, the board loses its operating charter. Franklin's been fighting that for 3 years. If the school loses charter, the parcel reverts to county control." He paused. "And Walter Grayson has been very quietly making friends at the county land office." Evelyn set the letter down on the desk. "He didn't send someone to steal my letter," she said. "He let me get here. He wanted me to arrive and be driven out immediately embarrassed, discredited, gone before I ever met Franklin Holt. Because if the teaching position falls apart publicly enough, Franklin loses credibility with the board. The charter renewal gets delayed. And Walter moves on the land before anyone knows what happened," Caleb finished. They looked at each other across the empty classroom. "How long have you known about this?" Evelyn asked. "The railroad survey? Few months." "No." She looked at him steadily. "How long have you known Walter was working an angle on the school land?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. The quiet was not evasion. She could tell the difference. She had spent years reading the difference. It was honesty taking its time. "I suspected it," he said. "I didn't know it until about 20 minutes ago when you put the pieces together just now." He paused. "You're fast." "I've had to be." He nodded once, as if this confirmed something he'd already thought. "What happened at the store this morning?" he said. "Walter didn't do that because you annoyed him. He did it because he needed the town to form an opinion of you before you could form one yourself. He needed you to be the worthless woman with no family and no money before you could be the school teacher with a letter from the board. He needed me discredited before I could be credible," Evelyn said. Yes, she felt the anger then, not the hot, immediate kind that comes with humiliation. She had already processed that she had stood perfectly still through that. This was the slower kind. The kind that comes when you understand that something was not spontaneous. Cruelty, but planned cruelty, and that the planning makes it so much worse. "He called my mother's necklace worthless," she said. Her voice was level, completely deliberately level. Caleb looked at her. "He knew I'd be wearing it or carrying it," she said. "He'd have prepared something to say about whatever I offered. The necklace coin, a promissory note, whatever it was, he'd have found the cruelest angle to it." She paused. "He researched me." "Or had someone research you," Caleb said. "He's got connections on the stage lines. Could have gotten your name off the passenger manifest weeks ago." Evelyn absorbed this. "Then he knows where I came from," she said. "Probably. And he'll use it." Caleb said nothing, which was a different kind of answer. She knew what he wasn't saying, because what she had not told him, what she had told no one since arriving, what she had specifically planned not to tell anyone until she was established enough that it wouldn't matter, was that she had left her previous town under a cloud. Not of her making, but clouds did not announce their origins. They simply sat over a person and made everything beneath them darker. "There was an accusation," she said. She had not planned to say it. It came out the way true things sometimes do not, because the moment is right, but because the silence has held it long enough. "In my previous town, a family I worked for bookkeeping. I kept their accounts. They claimed I had taken money. It wasn't true. But the claim was made, and I didn't have the means to fight it properly, and the simplest thing was to leave," Caleb said. Yes, he did not react in the way she had braced for. He did not step back or reappraise her, or do the careful recalculation that most people did when information complicated their first impression of someone. He simply said, "Was there any proof of the accusation? No. Was there a hearing? No. It never reached that stage. The family had standing in the community. I didn't. It was simply a thing that was said and believed. By some people, by most." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "You think Walter knows about it?" "If he researched me thoroughly enough," she said, "yes. and if he knows, he'll use it the moment my credibility starts to build. The moment the town begins to believe me about the letter and the position and the rest of it, he'll introduce the accusation and the whole thing collapses. Not if we get to Franklin Holt first, Caleb said. She looked at him. He's back Friday, he said. Today's Wednesday, 2 days. He paused. I can ride to the Holt's place first thing tomorrow. Margaret told you about the supper Saturday, but if I reach Franklin directly before Walter gets to him, you'd do that. He looked almost puzzled by the question. Why wouldn't I? He said. Because none of this is your problem, she said. None of this has anything to do with you. I am a stranger who walked into a store this morning with a bag of groceries and a necklace, and you have been... She stopped herself. Started again more carefully. You have been more involved in my situation in 8 hours than anyone in my life has been in the last 14 months. And I don't know why. Caleb looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. You want the honest answer or the polite one? He said. I want the honest one. The honest one is that I know what Walter Grayson does to people, he said. I've watched him do it for years. Little pieces at a time, a comment here, a deal there, a favor that becomes a debt, that becomes a chain. My sister's family lost 40 acres to him 4 years ago. Not because they were careless. Because he was patient, and they trusted him, and by the time they understood what the paperwork actually said, there was nothing left to fight with. He paused. I didn't do enough then. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it was their business and they'd work it through. A beat. They lost the land. Evelyn was quiet. So today, he said, when I walked into that store, and I saw him holding your mother's necklace and the room full of people laughing, he stopped. I didn't have any kind of plan. I wasn't thinking about railroad surveys or school charters. I just thought, not again. Not one more time. The schoolroom was very still. Outside, somewhere distant, there was the sound of a horse being walked past on the road, and the faint voices of women talking in front of the dry goods shop that Evelyn had passed on her way from the coach stop, and the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon in an ordinary western town that was, she now understood, not ordinary at all. I need to see my letter again, she said. The one I received the original offer. Caleb straightened. Why? She told him about the postmark, the date discrepancy, the impossibility of the sequencing. He listened without interrupting, which was another thing she was beginning to understand about him. He listened the way people listen when they actually intend to use what they hear. So someone sent you a copy, he said when she finished, or a draft, or a duplicate created from a draft that Franklin Holt or someone close to him discarded before sending the final. Walter has a contact in the county mail office, Caleb said slowly. Jim Pratt's brother works there. Has for 3 years. They looked at each other. He intercepted the original letter, Evelyn said. And sent you the copy to make certain you came, Caleb said. And then, when you arrived, he planned to make certain I left. She breathed through it. He didn't steal my letter to stop me from coming. He stole the original, the real one, so that when I arrived with a copy and the copy didn't match what was in Franklin Holt's records, you'd look like a fraud, Caleb said. The word fell hard and flat. A woman who'd forged a teaching letter to gain entry to a town. The anger was back, and this time it was not slow. Evelyn pressed her hands flat against the desk and looked at the far wall and breathed. He thought of all of it, she said, before I ever got on the coach. He's been doing this for 20 years, Caleb said. He's had time to get good at it. She turned to face him. The letter in my bag has a postmark problem, she said. But it has Franklin Holt's signature. If we can get it in front of Franklin directly before Walter poisons that well, and if Franklin recognizes his own handwriting on the copy, he'll know someone made a copy from his original draft, Caleb said. Which means someone had access to his office correspondence before it was mailed. Which means someone in this town has been in Franklin Holt's private correspondence. Caleb's jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough. I'll ride out tomorrow at first light, he said. I know which trail Franklin takes coming back from county. I can meet him before he reaches town." He paused. "You stay close to the schoolhouse. Don't go back to Grayson's store. If you need anything, there's a woman named Clara Webb who runs the laundry 2 streets over. She's honest, and she doesn't owe Walter anything." "How do you know who she owes?" Evelyn asked. "Because I keep track," he said simply. She wanted to ask him why he kept track, what it cost him to keep track. Whether living in a small town and knowing its entire architecture of debts and silences and quiet cruelties was something that sustained him, or simply something he had accepted. She did not ask, because they had covered enough ground for one afternoon, and because there was something in the set of his shoulders that told her he was already several steps ahead in his own mind, already on the trail in the early morning, already working the problem the way a man works a problem, when he has decided it is his to work. "Mr. Walker," she said. He looked at her. "I keep accounts," she said. "It's what I do, what I was hired for in my previous position before the accusation, and what I'm good at. Numbers don't lie the way people do. They sit in columns, and they add up to whatever they add up to, regardless of who wishes they'd add up to something else." He waited. If Walter has been manipulating land deals and debt records in this town for 20 years, she said, there are numbers somewhere that prove it. Ledgers, receipts, payment records, something that shows the difference between what people owed and what he told them they owed. Caleb was very still. "If I could see those records," she said, "I could find it. Whatever he's been hiding. I've reconstructed falsified accounts before in my previous position. Actually, before the accusation I found 3 years of discrepancies in the family's own records, and that was why—" She stopped, started again. "That was why they accused me, because I found it." Caleb looked at her with a new expression. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to recognition, the look of a man who has just understood that the person he thought he was helping is not in fact someone who needs the kind of help he'd been planning to offer. "They accused you," he said slowly, "because you found their fraud." "Yes. And so you left." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to have its own weight. "If you'd stayed and fought," he said, "you'd have had proof of their fraud, which would have been your defense against the accusation." "If I'd had money for a lawyer," she said, "if I'd had time, if I'd had anyone willing to stand in the room and say a word." She looked at him directly. "Do you understand now why what you did this morning mattered the way it did?" He understood. She could see that he understood. He put his hat on and moved toward the door. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to move fast." He paused in the doorway with his back to her. "Those accounts you found in your previous position, did you document them before you left?" She hesitated. "Evelyn," he said, and her name in his voice was different from what she'd expected, not careful or formal, but direct, the way you say someone's name when you've decided they're real. "I copied 3 pages, she said quietly. "I've carried them since." He nodded once without turning. "Good," he said. "Don't let anyone know you have them." He walked out. Evelyn stood in the empty schoolroom, alone in the late afternoon quiet, with the letter on the desk and the necklace at her throat, and 3 pages of copied ledger entries folded inside the back cover of her grammar book. And she thought about all the ways the morning had started, and all the ways it had ended, and how between those 2 points, the entire trajectory of what she was doing in Willow Creek had shifted into something she had not anticipated and could not fully see the edges of yet. She thought about the boy with the ink-stained hands. She thought about Margaret Holt's careful warning. She thought about what Caleb had said about his sister's land, the 40 acres, the patience, the paperwork that said one thing while meaning another. She thought about the fact that a man who spent years living alone in the mountains and believing he had failed everyone he loved had walked into a general store this morning and placed money on a counter for a stranger's groceries and stayed afterward to listen and then walked to the schoolhouse to tell her what he'd heard. And she thought Walter Grayson had spent 20 years in this town, building something out of silence and fear and slow, careful cruelty. He had done it because no one had pushed back, because one woman left. And then another family signed the paper. And then a man decided it wasn't his place. And then a room full of people laughed at a silver necklace and went home for supper. But there was a letter with a postmark problem sitting on the desk. And there were 3 pages of ledger entries in the back of a grammar book. And there was a man riding out at first light to intercept the school board chairman on the county trail. And Evelyn Carter was still here. She picked up the grammar book and put it carefully in her bag. She settled the strap on her shoulder. She walked to the door of the schoolhouse and stood in the frame for a moment, looking at the initials carved deep into the wood, TM, and thinking about a boy's mother who said school was the one thing that couldn't be taken away. Then she walked out toward Clara Webb's laundry on the next street, where a woman who owed Walter Grayson nothing might have a room to rent and a locked door and enough quiet for Evelyn to sit with her numbers and begin to build the case that Walter Grayson had spent 20 years believing no one would ever build. She had survived worse than this. She had survived worse than this, and she had kept her receipts. Clara Webb did not ask questions. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed about her. The woman who opened the back door of the laundry house in response to Caleb Walker's name spoken quietly on the threshold did not ask why or from where or what had happened. She simply looked at Evelyn with the measured, unhurried assessment of someone who had opened this particular door for this particular kind of woman before and said, "There's a room upstairs with a lock on it. Supper's at 6. I don't allow men past the front counter after dark." "That suits me perfectly," Evelyn said. The room was small, and the lock was real, and those were the only 2 things that mattered. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and opened her grammar book and removed the 3 folded pages from the back cover and spread them on the blanket in front of her, and for the first time since leaving her previous town, she looked at them in proper light, without the specific anxiety of someone who is always about to be found with something they shouldn't have. The pages were account ledger copies. Her own handwriting, careful and small, transcribed in 2 nights by lamplight before she packed her bag and left. 3 years of discrepancies in the Alderton family accounts. Payments recorded as received that the corresponding suppliers had no record of receiving. Land assessments logged at half their county-assessed value. A loan from a Pueblo bank that appeared in the ledger as fully repaid 18 months before the bank's own notation showed the first payment made. She had found it because she was good at her job. She had found it and said nothing immediately because she needed to be certain, and in the week she spent being certain, someone had noticed her noticing. The accusation came 4 days after she began asking careful questions about the Pueblo bank loan. She had understood immediately that this was not coincidence. But understanding the connection and being able to prove it in front of a town that had already decided were 2 different things, and she had chosen to leave because the alternative was a fight she could not win alone. She was looking at the pages now and thinking about what Caleb had said, that she'd had proof, and that the proof could have been her defense. And she was thinking that he was right technically, but that proof requires someone willing to look at it. And in her previous town, there had been no one. In Willow Creek, she was beginning to think there might be. She refolded the pages and put them back. Then, she sat very still and did something she had not let herself do in months. She thought about the future. Not the immediate future of tomorrow morning, and Caleb on the county trail, and Franklin Holt returning. Not the tactical future of evidence and hearings, and what might be provable and what might not. The actual future. The one where she stood in front of 8 small desks and taught Thomas Malone to write something other than his initials in door frames. The one where she stayed somewhere long enough to become known for the right reasons. She thought about that future very carefully and deliberately, the way you water something you're not yet certain will grow. Then she blew out the lamp and lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the town settle into night, and she slept better than she had in 14 months. She did not know that 2 streets away in the back room of Walter Grayson's store, a conversation was happening that would change everything by morning. Walter sat across from Jim Pratt, with a bottle of whiskey between them, that neither of them was drinking, and said, "She has the letter." Jim turned his hat in his hands. "The copy? That don't matter. It doesn't match what Holt has on file." "It has Franklin's signature," Walter said. "A copy of his signature." "It looks real," Walter said. "And if she gets it in front of Franklin before I do, Franklin is going to look at it and say it looks like his handwriting, And then suddenly there's a question about which document is the original and which one isn't, and questions are things I cannot afford right now. Jim put his hat on the table. So what do you want to do? Walter was quiet for a moment. Walker rode out late this afternoon, Jim said. Tom Bridger saw him heading up the North Trail. Walter looked at him. Going to meet Holt on the road, Jim said. Has to be. Walter picked up the whiskey and set it back down without drinking. She figured it out, he said, not with surprise, with something closer to respect, which on Walter Grayson's face looked almost like anger. She's been in town one day, and she figured it out. What do you want to do? Jim said again. Walter looked at the wall. The accusation from her previous town, he said. Get it in writing. I need the family's name attached to it. I need dates. I need it to look like an official complaint. Get it to me by morning. Jim frowned. That's going to take more than... I'll write it myself if I have to, Walter said. I just need a name I can use. Jim was quiet for a moment. Then, that's forgery, Walter. So is sending a woman a copied school board letter to lure her across the state. Walter looked at him evenly. We are well past the line, Jim. We crossed it a long time ago. Jim picked up his hat. Morning, he said and left. Walter sat alone with the undrunk whiskey and thought about Parcel 47 and the railroad survey and the $40,000 that the right-of-way easement would make of a corner lot that he currently had the county assessor prepared to release to him for $1,100. And he thought about one woman who had arrived in his town with a worn travel bag and a dead woman's necklace and had in less than a day assembled more of the truth than anyone had managed in 20 years. He thought she needs to be gone by Friday. And then he thought about Caleb Walker, who had made it his business to step into something that was not his business, and his expression went flat and cold in the particular way it did when he was no longer calculating, but deciding. Caleb rode through the night. He did not sleep. He took the North Trail out of Willow Creek at 4 a.m, before the town was properly awake, and rode steady through the mountain dark, because he knew the trail well enough to navigate it without full light, and because Franklin Holt always stopped at the Ridley Creek crossing to water his horse. And that was where Caleb needed to be. He had time on the trail to think. He thought about Evelyn Carter's voice when she said the accusation came because she found the fraud. That particular flatness, not bitterness, not self-pity, just the worn, smooth tone of someone who has said a thing so many times inside their own head that the emotion has been used up. What's left is just the fact of it. He thought about his sister Ruth sitting at the table in the farmhouse 4 years ago, with the papers spread in front of her, and her husband standing behind her with his hand on her shoulder, and both of them looking at Caleb with the specific expression of people who have been told the thing they feared is true and are now waiting for someone to tell them what to do about it. He had not known what to do. He had read the papers, and he had ridden to town, and he had spoken to 2 lawyers, and both of them had said the same thing. The document was legal. The signatures were valid. The terms were hard but binding, and there was nothing to be done. He had gone back to Ruth and said those words and watched something go out of her face. He had lived with that ever since. The thing about guilt Caleb had discovered was that it didn't diminish with time the way people said it did. It just became quieter. It moved further down and sat lower in the chest and stopped making noise, but it was always there. And certain things, a woman holding a necklace steady against cruelty, a room full of people deciding not to say a word, could bring it right back up to the surface in an instant, loud and immediate as the day it was formed. He reached the Ridley Creek crossing at just past 7. Franklin Holt arrived 20 minutes later, which was close enough to the time Caleb had calculated that he allowed himself a small private relief. Franklin was a solid man in his 60s, with a beard going white and the cautious, deliberate manner of someone who had spent decades making decisions in rooms where everyone disagreed. He pulled up at the creek and looked at Caleb with recognition and a carefully neutral expression. "Caleb Walker," he said, "you didn't ride out here to discuss the weather." "No, sir," Caleb said. "I need to talk to you about the school position, and about Walter Grayson, and I need you to hear it before you get back to town." Franklin dismounted. He was quiet through all of it, the morning in the store, the postmark discrepancy, The land survey, the missing letters from the school board office that Margaret had mentioned. He stood with his arms folded and his eyes on the middle distance, and listened the way judges listen, without giving anything away about what they're concluding. When Caleb finished, Franklin was quiet for a long moment. "The woman," he said. "This Evelyn Carter, you believe her?" "I do." "Why?" Caleb thought about how to answer that accurately. "Because she found fraud in her previous position," he said. "And the family accused her of theft 4 days later. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern I recognize." Franklin looked at him. "Because Walter's been running that pattern in this town for 20 years, Caleb said. "And I didn't do enough about it. I'm doing something about it now." Franklin unfolded his arms and rubbed the back of his neck. "The original letter," he said. "The one I sent. It should be in her possession. She has a copy, with your signature, but the postmark is 3 days before the date on the letter." Franklin went very still. "That's not possible," he said. "I wrote that letter on the 14th and mailed it the same day." "Someone had a copy of an earlier draft," Caleb said, "or made one. My office." Franklin's voice had changed, gone quiet in a way that was not calm. "I had a draft on my desk for 2 days before I finalized it. Anyone with access to the building—" He stopped, his jaw set. "Jim Pratt's brother delivers the county mail." "Yes?" "He would have seen the postage go out. He'd have known which day I sent it." Franklin's expression had moved past careful now into something harder. "And a man who has access to county mail outgoing and incoming could have opened it," Caleb said, "before delivery, made a copy, resealed it, and sent her the copy with enough delay to create the postmark problem." "Yes." Franklin stood at the creek in the mountain morning and looked like a man who is reassembling something he thought was intact and discovering how many pieces have been moved. "I've had correspondence go missing," he said. 3 letters from the county education board in the last year. I assumed the mail was unreliable. It's unreliable enough that I didn't question it. "Walter counted on that," Caleb said. "How long has he been in my correspondence?" "I don't know, but Miss Carter does accounts. And she says the shape of this, the patience, the layering, looks like something that started a long time before the railroad survey." Franklin looked at him sharply. "She knows about the survey. She figured it out inside of half a day," Caleb said. "She's sharp, Mr. Holt. Sharper than anyone Walter planned for." Franklin was quiet for a moment. Then something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but the forerunner of one. "Good," he said. They rode back to Willow Creek together, which was not something Caleb had planned, but which felt, once it was happening, like the only sensible outcome. Franklin wanted to reach his office before the town was fully in motion. Caleb wanted to reach Evelyn before she had reason to do anything alone. They made good time, but not good enough. Because when they came down the main road into Willow Creek at 9:30, there were people in front of the general store more than the usual morning traffic, clustered the way people cluster when something has happened or is about to. And in the middle of the cluster on the wooden sidewalk in front of Walter Grayson's store was Evelyn Carter. Caleb felt his stomach go cold. She was standing very straight, and her hands were at her sides, and across from her stood Walter, with a piece of paper in his hand and the particular expression of a man who is performing something he has rehearsed. Behind him stood 2 of his men and the woman who ran the telegraph office, and the deputy whose name was Calhoun, and whose relationship to Walter's influence was Caleb knew complicated. Caleb pushed his horse to a faster pace. He heard Walter's voice before he was close enough to see clearly. Formal complaint filed in Larimer County, dated March of this year, alleging theft of funds from the household accounts of... "That document is false," Evelyn said. Her voice was carrying. She was not shouting. She was doing the precise opposite, speaking with such controlled clarity that every word reached the back of the crowd without effort. "I have it in writing," Walter said, holding up the paper. "Signed by the family." "May I see it?" Evelyn said. Walter held it toward her, then pulled it back slightly, the same motion he'd made with the necklace. Caleb realized. The same gesture. The same small demonstration of control. "You can look at it here," Walter said. Evelyn leaned forward and looked at it. And then something crossed her face that Walter clearly had not anticipated, because she did not look frightened, and she did not look defeated, and she did not look like a woman who has just been shown evidence of her own disgrace. She looked like a woman who has just been shown exactly what she expected to find. "The date on that complaint," she said loudly enough for the crowd, "is March 14th. Walter said nothing. "I left my previous position in January," she said. "I left in January and traveled west, and I have been in 3 different towns since then, none of which are in Larimer County. A complaint filed in March of this year about events in January would have been filed 2 months after I left, in a county I never passed through, by a family I stopped working for in a different county entirely." She paused. "You can verify my travel record through the stage company. I have receipts." The crowd was very quiet. Walter's expression did not change, but something behind it did. "The family may have filed the complaint from Larimer County," he said. "People move. Then you'll have no trouble producing the family's current address in Larimer County," Evelyn said, "along with the name of the county registrar who accepted the complaint. Since you have it in writing, those details will naturally be included." Walter looked at the paper in his hand. Caleb reached the edge of the crowd and dismounted and moved through it without urgency, because urgency would draw attention to his arrival, and he wanted for just a moment longer to let Evelyn handle what she was handling, because she was handling it. "The name on that complaint," she said. "What is it?" Walter said nothing. "You showed it to this crowd as evidence of a formal accusation against me. Read them the name." "Alderton," Walter said, and his voice had gone slightly flat. "Alderton?" Evelyn repeated. "And where does the Alderton family reside according to this document?" A pause. "Larimer County," Walter said. "Which township?" Longer pause. "That information is—" "Walter?" Evelyn's voice was very quiet now. "There is no Alderton family in Larimer County. The Alderton family lives in Jefferson County, which is where I worked for them, and where any legitimate complaint would have been filed. You misspelled the county." She looked at the crowd. "He didn't research it carefully enough because he wrote it last night." The silence in the crowd had changed quality. Caleb could feel it, the specific shift that happens when people who have been watching a performance realize what they've been watching is not what they thought. Walter's face did something complicated. He started to speak. "Mr. Grayson." Franklin Holt's voice. The crowd turned. Franklin came through it on horseback, unhurried and solid, and dismounted at the edge of the sidewalk, and looked at Walter, the way he looked at difficult problems, without hostility, but without any give in it either. "Franklin," Walter said, and his voice had changed again, back to the level, reasonable tone of a man addressing a peer. "I was just bringing some information to the town's attention regarding the woman you've hired." "I see that," Franklin said. He looked at the paper in Walter's hand. "May I—" Walter handed it over. Franklin read it. His expression did not change. He handed it to Evelyn. She read it. Then she reached into her bag and produced her own letter, the copy with the postmark problem, and held both documents in her hands and looked at them side by side. "Mr. Holt," she said, "the signature on this complaint and the signature on my school board letter." Franklin looked. The crowd pressed slightly closer. "Same hand," Evelyn said. The crowd heard it. Walter said, "That's the same pen pressure, the same slant on the capital letters, the same way the H is formed in Holt, because whoever forged this complaint copied your signature from the letter he intercepted." She looked at Walter directly. "He had your letter long enough to study your handwriting, and he wasn't careful enough to vary it." Franklin Holt looked at Walter Grayson with an expression that had been building Caleb suspected for quite some time. "Walter," he said quietly, "I think we need to sit down with the deputy and have a conversation." "Now wait, not a request," Franklin said. Caleb had reached the sidewalk by now. He stood at the edge of it and looked at Evelyn, who was still holding both documents, and she looked back at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before, something that was not quite triumph and not quite relief, but lived in the territory between them and beneath it, something quieter and more permanent. "You had receipts," he said. "I always have receipts," she said. Walter tried one more time. He turned to the crowd, the farmers and the women with their baskets, and the men who had laughed that morning in the store, and he said, "You're going to believe a stranger over a man who's been part of this community for 20 years." Nobody laughed. A woman near the back of the crowd, middle-aged with the practical clothing of a rancher's wife, said, "My husband signed papers with you 6 years ago, Walter. Said he owed you $200. But we paid $140 and 81, and we have the receipt." Silence. "I have mine too," said a man's voice somewhere to the left. Then another. Then a third. Walter Grayson stood on the sidewalk in front of his own store and watched his community turn one voice at a time into something he had not prepared for, because he had spent 20 years ensuring it would never happen, and it was happening now because one woman had arrived with a worn travel bag and a dead mother's necklace and had not left when he told her to. Deputy Calhoun, to his credit, stepped forward. "Walter," he said, "you'd better come with me." Walter went. Not quietly, he argued, and he threatened, and he said things about what his lawyer would say, and what the county commissioner owed him, and what would happen to this town without his investment in it. But he went because Calhoun had finally understood which way the morning had broken, and men like Calhoun were good at understanding which way things broke. The crowd did not cheer. It did something more interesting. It exhaled the collective release of people who have been holding something too long and are only now realizing the weight of it. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk and held the 2 documents and breathed. Caleb stood beside her and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said immediately. Franklin Holt came to stand on her other side. "Miss Carter," he said, "I owe you an apology. The letter, the fact that my correspondence was—" "You didn't know," she said. "That doesn't excuse Mr. Holt," she said. "I would very much like to start teaching on Monday." Franklin looked at her for a moment. "Monday," he said, "is fine." But Caleb noticed something the crowd did not. When Walter had been walked to the deputy's office, and the crowd had begun to disperse, and Franklin was speaking to Margaret, who had appeared from the direction of their house, and the woman who'd mentioned the receipt was talking to 3 others in low, urgent voices. In the middle of all of that, Jim Pratt had slipped away from the back of the crowd. Caleb watched him go. Jim walked quickly. Not running. Running would draw attention toward the south end of the main road, and Caleb tracked him with his eyes until Jim turned the corner toward the stable. A man heading for his horse. A man who had helped forge a county complaint and intercept school board mail, and who was now watching the morning collapse and calculating how much time he had before that collapse reached him specifically. "Evelyn," Caleb said quietly. "I saw him," she said. He looked at her. "Jim Pratt," she said. "He was the one who talked to Walter in the store yesterday. He left when Walter went with Calhoun." She paused. "He's going to run." "Or he's going to do something worse," Caleb said. She looked at him. "What's worse than running?" "Getting to Walter's office before we do," he said. "Walter has 20 years of records in that store. Account books, land deal documents, whatever he used to back-channel the county land office." He paused. "If Jim gets to those records before we do, he'll destroy them," Evelyn said. They moved at the same moment, not running, but walking with the specific purpose that is faster than running when you know where you're going, and the other person doesn't know you're coming. Caleb went around the back of the store. Evelyn went through the front where the door was still unlocked, because Walter had not had a chance to close up before the morning came apart on him. The store was empty. She went behind the counter through the door marked "Private" that she had correctly guessed led to Walter's back office, and she found what she was looking for immediately, because Walter was organized in the way that men who manage complex frauds must be organized. The ledgers were on the shelf, in order by year 22 of them, going back 2 decades, each one labeled in Walter's precise hand. She pulled the most recent 3. She opened the first one. Her eyes moved down the columns with the speed of someone who has been reading ledgers since she was 16 years old and knows what she is looking for before she finds it. She found it on the 3rd page. The back door of the office opened, and Caleb came through it with Jim Pratt's arm locked behind his back, and Jim Pratt's face carrying the expression of a man who has been caught doing the thing he was caught doing. He was at the stable, Caleb said. Not saddling up. He paused. Burning something. The mail records, Jim said, and his voice had the hollow quality of someone who has already made a calculation about what cooperation might buy him. I burned the mail records, the copies of the letters. Evelyn did not look up from the ledger. That's all right, she said. I don't need the mail records. Jim and Caleb both looked at her. She set her finger on a line in the ledger. I need this, she said. This entry here, and this one, and these 4 going back to 81. She looked at Jim. Did Walter keep a separate book for the county land office payments, or did he run them through the main accounts? Jim was quiet for a moment. Separate book, he said. Top shelf, brown cover. Caleb got it down. Evelyn opened it. She read 3 pages. Then she sat down in Walter Grayson's chair in Walter Grayson's office, with Walter Grayson's records spread in front of her, and she began to do what she was best at. She began to build a number that told the truth. Caleb watched her work. He had seen people work before, men building fence and laying stone and breaking horses, and he knew what it looked like when someone was doing the thing they were genuinely made for. There was a quality to it that was different from simply doing a job well. Something settled and absolute. Evelyn Carter, sitting in the dim back room of the store of the man who had called her worthless and tried to erase her from this town before she could take root in it, was adding columns with a pencil she'd produced from her bag, and her handwriting was small and precise, and she was not looking at anything except the numbers. $47,000, she said after a time. Caleb looked up. That's the approximate total, she said, of what Walter Grayson has extracted from this town in fraudulent debt collection, land undervaluation, and county payment manipulation over 22 years. She looked at the page. 47,200 and change. Jim made a sound that was not quite a word. How long did that take you? Caleb said. 30 minutes, she said. I'll need another hour to document it properly, something that can go in front of a judge. She looked at him. Can you get Franklin Holt? Yes. And someone with legal standing, a county notary or a circuit clerk, someone who can attest to document authenticity. Franklin will know who. She nodded and looked back at the ledger. Jim, she said without looking up. You are going to sit in that chair in the corner, and you are not going to move. And when the time comes for you to give an account of what you knew, and when you knew it, you are going to tell the complete truth. Because the numbers in these books are going to tell the truth whether you do or not, and the only variable is whether you look like a man who cooperated or a man who didn't. Jim sat in the corner chair. Caleb went to get Franklin Holt, and Evelyn Carter sat in the quiet of Walter Grayson's office with 22 years of fraud laid out in front of her, and did the thing she had been trained to do and had been prevented from doing, and had carried the ghost of doing for 14 months. She built the case column number by number, in her small, precise handwriting on the pages of a notebook she had packed in her travel bag next to her mother's photograph. And she did not hurry because accuracy was more important than speed. And she understood completely that what she was building in this room would outlast this morning and this town's surprise and Walter Grayson's threats, and would exist as a permanent, legible record of the truth. Outside, she could hear the town, the voices gathering and the horses and the creak of storefronts opening and the ordinary sound of a community trying to understand what it had just watched happen and what it meant. She heard a child's voice at some point high and carrying say something she couldn't make out, and a woman's voice respond. She heard the bell above the store's front door ring once as someone came in, and then Caleb's voice saying, "Back here," and then Franklin Holt's footsteps and Margaret's alongside them. She heard all of it, and she kept working. She was still working when Thomas Malone appeared in the doorway of the back office, apparently having followed the adults through the store in the particular way that 12-year-old boys follow important events, and stood looking at her with those ink-stained hands and that careful measuring expression. "What are you doing?" he said. "Accounting," she said without looking up. "Is it important?" "Yes." A pause. "Can I watch?" he said. She looked up then. She looked at the boy in the doorway, his mother's son, the one who carved his initials deep, so they would stay the one who practiced letters on his own hands when he couldn't get to school. "Come in," she said. "Sit here. Watch what I do." She turned the ledger slightly so he could see. "This is what it looks like when numbers tell the truth. You should know how to read it." Thomas pulled a stool to the edge of the desk and sat and looked at the columns with the focused gravity of a child who has been waiting his entire life to be taught something that matters. And Evelyn Carter in the back room of the store, that had tried to make her worthless, taught him. Franklin Holt sat across from the ledgers for a long time without speaking. Margaret stood behind him with her hand on the back of his chair, and Caleb stood near the door, and Jim Pratt sat in the corner with the look of a man who has decided that the only remaining question is how much his cooperation is worth. And Thomas sat on his stool at the edge of the desk, watching everything with those careful recording eyes. Franklin turned a page, then another. Then he set his hand flat on the open ledger and looked at Evelyn. "How long to document this properly?" he said. "For a judge." "I need the rest of today," she said. "And I need someone to sit with me who can attest that I'm transcribing accurately from the original records. A witness who has no connection to Walter or to me." "Clara Webb," Caleb said immediately. Franklin nodded. "Clara's good. She'll do it." He paused. "I'll send for the circuit judge. He passes through Mineral County on Thursdays. If I wire today, he can be here by the weekend." He looked at the ledger again. $47,000. "Approximate," Evelyn said. "The precise figure will be in the documentation." "In 22 years," Franklin said. It was not quite a question. He was patient, Evelyn said. He never took enough at once to make any single person feel robbed. He just adjusted. A number here, a valuation there. The kind of changes that look like clerical errors until you see them all together. She paused. That's how this kind of fraud survives. It relies on people looking at their own piece and not seeing the whole. Franklin looked at her with the expression of a man who is filing something away permanently. "Where did you learn accounts?" he said. "My father," she said. "He kept books for a mining company in Denver. He taught me when I was 11 because he said numbers were the one language that didn't change depending on who was speaking them." She paused. He was right. Margaret made a small sound that was not quite a word, the sound of a woman who has heard something that confirms a conclusion she'd already reached, and squeezed Franklin's shoulder. "I'll get Clara," Margaret said, and left. Franklin stood. He looked at Jim Pratt. "You," he said. "You're going to write down everything you know, everything Walter asked you to do, and every time you did it, and every piece of mail you touched that wasn't yours to touch. You're going to write it clearly and sign it, and it's going to be part of the record." He paused. "You do that fully and honestly, and I'll speak on your behalf to the judge about cooperation. You leave anything out. I'll write it," Jim said. He sounded tired. "I'll write all of it." Franklin gave him paper from the desk and left him to it. Then it was just Caleb and Evelyn in the office, and Franklin's footsteps receding through the store, and the distant ordinary sounds of the town outside. Caleb looked at her. She looked like she had been awake for 30 hours, which she had not. It was barely noon, but the morning had the density of 30 hours packed into it, and her face showed the arithmetic of that. There were shadows under her eyes, and her hair had come partly loose from its arrangement, and she was still holding the pencil she'd been calculating with, turning it slowly in her fingers without knowing she was doing it. "You should eat something," he said. "I should finish this first. You've been going since before dawn." "You rode through the night," she said. "Don't talk to me about sleep." He almost smiled. He felt it in the muscles near his mouth and stopped it before it arrived, because smiling felt strange the way things feel when you haven't done them in a while, and the machinery has gotten stiff. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. She looked up. "Walter's men," he said. "Not Jim. The others Pratt had too, who worked for him more casually, hauling storage, that kind of thing. Walter used them when he needed things done that he didn't want attached to his name." He paused. "Those men aren't in custody. Calhoun's got Walter. He doesn't have them." Evelyn set the pencil down. "Where are they?" she said. "I don't know," Caleb said. "That's the problem." She thought about this. Her expression went through something, not fear, or not only fear, but the particular kind of alertness that comes when you understand that a situation you believed was resolving has an unresolved edge. "They'd need a direction from Walter," she said. "He's in custody. Can he send messages?" "Calhoun's not experienced with this kind of thing," Caleb said. "He's a good man, but Walter's the biggest thing that's ever happened to his jail. I don't know how careful he's being." "Then we need to be careful," she said. "Yes." She picked up the pencil again. "I'm going to keep working," she said. "You're going to make sure Calhoun understands that Walter shouldn't be receiving visitors. And then," she paused, "then I need you to do something that might seem unnecessary." "Tell me." "The families he defrauded," she said. "The ones with receipts. The woman this morning and the others who spoke up. Someone needs to go to each of them and tell them what's in these books, specifically, not generally." She looked at him. "Because when the judge comes and Walter's lawyer comes and this goes through the legal process, there will be a period where it could still go the wrong way. And the thing that will prevent it from going the wrong way is a community that understands exactly what was done to them and is prepared to stand in a room and say so." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You're building the human record," he said. "Not just the paper one." "The paper record wins the legal case," she said. "The human record makes sure the legal case doesn't quietly disappear." She paused. "I've seen that happen. I've seen very clear evidence made to go away when the man with the evidence doesn't have enough people standing beside him." "Or her," Caleb said. She looked at him. "Or her," he said again. "You're not going to be alone in that room, Evelyn." She absorbed this carefully, the way she absorbed things that mattered, not quickly, not with visible emotion, but with that particular attention that meant she was placing it somewhere she would not lose it. "Go talk to Calhoun," she said. "I have work to do." He went. The afternoon moved in the particular way that afternoons move when a great deal is happening at great speed in a small space. Clara Webb arrived and sat beside Evelyn and attested to each page of transcription with the steady, unimpressed witness of a woman who had spent 30 years running a business in a frontier town and was not easily rattled. Franklin Holt sent the telegraph wire to the circuit judge's circuit. Caleb spoke to Calhoun, who was not experienced with this kind of thing, but was earnest enough to take instruction, and then rode the afternoon visiting 6 families who had receipts or memories or both. Thomas Malone stayed at the desk beside Evelyn until his father appeared in the office doorway at 3 in the afternoon with the particular parental expression that lives between relief and exasperation. "Tom," his father said, "your ma's been—" "Pa," Thomas said, "Miss Carter found $47,000 that Mr. Grayson took from people." His father looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him with the professional steadiness she used when she needed people to understand something important without being overwhelmed by it. "Mr. Malone," she said, "I believe your family may have records that are relevant to this account. Receipts, payment notes, anything from your dealings with Walter Grayson over the years." Thomas's father, a lean, weathered man with his son's same careful eyes, stood in the doorway for a moment. "We got a box of them," he said slowly. "Sarah, my wife, she kept everything. I always told her it was unnecessary." He paused. "She'll want to know about this." "Bring the box tomorrow morning," Evelyn said, "before 9. He nodded once and looked at his son and jerked his head toward the door. Thomas slid off the stool. He was almost out of the room when he turned back. "Miss Carter," he said. She looked up. "Monday," he said. "I'll be at school Monday." She looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile, but carried everything a smile carries. "I'll expect you," she said. Thomas and his father left. Clara turned a page and kept writing. Evelyn kept building the number. It was past 5 in the afternoon when Caleb came back. He came through the back door and set his hat on the edge of the desk and looked at what was spread in front of Evelyn and Clara and said nothing for a moment. "6 families," he said finally. "Between them they have enough documentation to support at least a third of what's in the ledgers. 2 more said they'd look through their records tonight. He paused. The Belcher family, northwest of town, cattle their whole land transfer was based on a fraudulent debt that Walter manufactured in '79. They were the first. They just didn't know they were the first. The first is always the test case, Evelyn said without looking up. He ran it on the Belchers to see how it worked. When it worked, he refined it and ran it again. They want to be in that room when the judge comes, Caleb said. The Belchers, and the Malones, and Ada Prentice. She's the woman who spoke up this morning. Her husband's been dead 6 years, but she's still paying Walter on a debt that was settled according to these books in '82. Evelyn stopped writing. She looked at the ledger. Then she looked at Caleb. Ada Prentice, she said carefully. Is her original debt listed as a land improvement loan? Approximately $400, 78. Caleb frowned. I don't know the details. Why? She turned the ledger to face him and set her finger on a line. He leaned forward and read it. Then he read it again. That's marked as outstanding, he said. With interest compounded annually, she said, at a rate that is 3 points above the legal maximum for this county. She paused. Which means, even if the original debt were legitimate, which I don't believe it is, the interest charges are illegal. She doesn't owe him anything. Legally based on what she's already paid, he owes her. Caleb straightened slowly. How much? He said. $63 and change, Evelyn said. Something moved in Caleb's face. She's a widow, he said. She runs that property alone, has for 6 years. I know, Evelyn said quietly. She did not say the rest of what she was thinking. That Ada Prentice, standing in the crowd that morning and naming her receipt, had probably been the hardest thing she'd done in years, and that the courage it took to speak up publicly against a man who controlled your debt was a specific and enormous kind of courage that most people never had to locate in themselves. She did not say it because Clara was writing, and the afternoon was moving, and there was still work to do. But she thought it. And Caleb, watching her face, understood it without being told. There's something else, he said. His voice had changed, gone slightly quieter. The specific tone she had learned that meant he was about to say something he had been carrying for a while. Tell me, she said. He sat down in the chair across from the desk the first time she had seen him sit down since this whole morning began, and he set his hands on his knees and looked at them for a moment. My sister Ruth, he said. The 40 acres I told you about. She waited. I went through Walter's land records this afternoon while you were working, he said. Before I rode out to the families. He paused. The sale document for Ruth's land, the one I read 4 years ago. The one the lawyers said was legal and binding. Another pause longer. It's in here. And the debt Walter used to force the sale, the original debt, it's logged in the '80 ledger. He paused. Evelyn. The debt he used to take Ruth's land was $32. She was very still. $32, he said again. Compounded illegally for 2 years to make it look like $160. And then he offered to settle the $160 against the assessed land value which he had underreported to the county by 60%. He stopped. Ruth didn't lose that land because she was careless or because she trusted him. She lost it because he manufactured a debt from $32 and made it look like everything she owned. Evelyn set down her pencil. Caleb, she said. He looked at the floor. You didn't fail her, she said. The lawyers you spoke to, they read a document that looked legitimate because it was designed to look legitimate by a man who'd spent years perfecting that design. You couldn't have seen what wasn't visible. I should have looked harder, he said. You were one person, she said. He was 20 years of practice. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Clara had stopped writing. Evelyn noticed with the tact of a woman who understood when a room needed her to be absent without leaving. She never blamed me, Caleb said finally. Ruth, she never once said it was my fault. He paused. I think that made it worse. It usually does, Evelyn said. He looked at her. My mother's necklace, she said. The reason I was carrying it instead of leaving it somewhere safe. She stopped, then started again. After she died, my brother said it wasn't worth anything. He said the silver was probably plated, probably not worth more than $1 or $2. He said I should sell it with the rest of the household items. She paused. I had it tested by a jeweler in Denver. It's sterling. It's worth $40. She looked at the necklace she was still wearing. But I wasn't carrying it because of what it's worth. I was carrying it because letting my brother decide it was worthless, letting him name its value when he only wanted it gone, would have been letting him decide the same thing about her. Caleb was watching her. Some things, she said, you carry because setting them down feels like agreeing with the people who told you to drop them. He was quiet for a moment. Like staying in Willow Creek, he said. Yes. When Walter told you to go. Yes. He leaned forward slightly, his forearms on his knees, and he looked at her with the direct and honest attention of someone who has put down something heavy and is seeing more clearly for it. I've been living alone on that mountain for 4 years, he said. Since Ruth lost the land. I told myself it was simpler. That I'd done enough damage being involved in people's lives, and it was better to stay out. He paused. Yesterday morning I walked into Grayson's store to pick up fence wire. She almost smiled. Just fence wire. Just fence wire, he said. And instead, I committed yourself entirely to a stranger's problem, she said. Yes. He paused. I don't regret it. I know, she said. That's the part that concerns me slightly. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen from him before, surprised, and then something warmer than surprised. Something that did not have a practical name, but lived in the place where a person's face goes unguarded. Concerns you how? He said. Because I'm going to be here? She said. In this town, teaching, and the situation that brought us into each other's orbit is going to resolve. The judge will come, the records will speak, Walter will face consequences, and at that point, the crisis is over, and we go back to being two people who happen to live in the same vicinity. Is that what you think happens? He said. I think it's what usually happens. Usually, he said. Clara turned a page. The sound of it was very deliberate. Evelyn picked up her pencil. I need to finish this before the light goes, she said. Caleb picked up his hat and stood. I'm going to check on Calhoun, he said. And then I'm going to ride up to the ranch and bring some things back. I'll be at Clara's by 8 tonight. You don't need to. I know, he said. He left through the back. Evelyn looked at the page in front of her. Clara said, without looking up from her transcription. In 30 years of running a business in this town, I have seen exactly 3 men who said what they meant. He is the third. Evelyn said nothing, which Clara apparently took as all the answer she needed. They worked until the light made it impossible. The documentation was complete by 743 pages of transcribed records, with Clara's witness notation on each one. The original ledgers set aside under lock with Franklin Holt's seal. Jim Pratt's written testimony folded and signed, and a clear numerical summary on the final page that showed $47,211 in fraudulent extraction over 22 years, broken down by year and by category of fraud. Franklin took the documents to his house for safekeeping. Evelyn walked to Clara's laundry with the original 3 copied ledger pages from her grammar book and the letter with the postmark problem and her mother's photograph, and not much else, and she sat at Clara's kitchen table and ate the first real meal she'd had in 2 days, without tasting very much of it. Clara sat across from her and poured coffee, and did not require conversation, which was exactly what Evelyn needed. She was almost finished eating when Clara said, "The room's yours as long as you need it. I want that said plainly." Evelyn looked at her. "People in this town have short memories sometimes," Clara said. "Or they like to think they do. Tomorrow morning, they'll be processing what happened today, and some of them will have complicated feelings about having laughed in that store." She paused. A woman alone in a rooming house is easier to pressure than a woman who has a clear arrangement with someone established. "I'll pay you properly," Evelyn said. On a teaching assistant's wages, Clara said. Pay me what you can, and we'll call the rest neighborly. Evelyn felt the tightness behind her sternum that she had learned to associate with being offered something real. Clara, she said, why did Caleb trust you specifically when he told me to come here? Clara looked into her coffee cup for a moment. When my husband died, she said, 11 years ago Walter Grayson came to me inside a month with a loan offer. Very reasonable terms. Very friendly. She paused. I told him I'd learned to read a contract before I signed one. He left and never offered the loan again. She looked up. Caleb Walker was 17 years old at the time. He'd been doing odd work for me that summer. After Walter left, he sat on that porch step out there and said, Miss Clara, you did the right thing. And that was the whole conversation. She set down the cup. He's been doing the right thing in small ways his entire life. He just got out of the habit of doing it for himself. Evelyn thought about this for a long time after she said goodnight to Clara and went upstairs and sat on the edge of the narrow bed with the lock turned. She thought about a 17-year-old Caleb Walker sitting on a porch step. She thought about a man who had spent 4 years alone on a mountain carrying guilt for something that was not his fault because the people he loved were too kind to blame him, and he couldn't figure out how to put it down. She thought about the schoolroom with its 8 small desks and Thomas's initials in the doorframe. She thought about 8 apprentice and $63 and the courage of a widow who had stood in a crowd and named her receipt. She was almost asleep when she heard the sound below a door. Then Clara's voice, quiet but audible, saying, She's upstairs. She's asleep, Caleb. A pause. Then Caleb's voice very low. Is she all right? A longer pause. Clara's voice dry and precise. She finished 43 pages of legal documentation and ate a full supper. She's better than all right. Another pause. Then, good. Footsteps on the porch. Then nothing. Evelyn lay in the dark with her eyes open and felt something she had not permitted herself in a very long time, the specific dangerous warmth of knowing that someone has checked on you, not because it was their obligation, but because they needed to know. She did not examine it closely. She put it somewhere careful, the way you put something you intend to return to when you have the time to look at it properly. And then she slept. She was awake before dawn. Not because of noise, the town was quiet, the deep quiet of early morning, but because something in her woke her the same way something had woken her in the 3 towns before this one, the instinct of a woman who had learned to register changes in her environment before she was conscious of registering them. She lay still and listened. A horse. Moving slow. Careful, the specific careful of an animal being kept quiet deliberately. She was at the window in 4 seconds. 2 men on horseback in the alley behind Clara's property moving toward the south end of town. Moving toward the south end, which was where Walter Grayson's store was, and where Evelyn's chest went cold, Franklin Holt had locked the original ledgers. She did not stop to fully dress. She pulled her boots on, and her coat over her nightgown, and she went down the stairs and out the front door and around the block at a pace that was not quite running, but covered ground like running, and she went to the house 2 streets over, where she knew Caleb had said he was staying since coming down from the ranch. She knocked on the door. He answered in 15 seconds, which meant he had not been deeply asleep either. He took one look at her face. How many, he said. 2, she said, heading toward the store. He was pulling on his boots before she finished the sentence. Walter got a message out, he said. Through Calhoun's jail. Has to be. He stood. Franklin's got the ledgers at his house. If they hit the store first and find them gone, they'll go to Franklin's house, she said. They moved. The town was not large. It took 4 minutes to reach Franklin Holt's house on the east side of the main road, moving through the back paths that Caleb knew by years of memory. They were not the first ones there. One of Walter's men was already at Franklin's side gate, not inside yet, working the latch with the methodical patience of someone who had done this kind of thing before. Caleb said, "Don't." His voice in the pre-dawn dark was not loud. It did not need to be. The man at the gate went still. "Step back from there," Caleb said. He did. The second man came around the corner of the fence line and stopped when he saw Caleb, and then his eyes moved to Evelyn, and something in his expression shifted. Surprise, she thought, at seeing a woman there at that hour. And then something less comfortable than surprise, when he understood she was not afraid of him. "Whatever Walter promised you," Caleb said, "is not worth what you're about to do. He is in a jail cell. He cannot deliver on any promise he made through those bars. And the man whose house you're standing in front of is the head of the school board, who is currently in possession of 22 years of documents that will be in front of a circuit judge by Saturday." Silence. "That judge," Caleb said, "is going to be looking very carefully at who cooperated and who didn't, and men who tried to destroy evidence the night before his arrival." He left it there. The man at the gate looked at the other man. The other man looked at the ground. "We were just passing through," the first man said. "I know you weren't," Caleb said. "And you know I know. So here's what's going to happen. You're both going to walk to Calhoun's office right now and tell him Walter sent you and what he asked you to do. You're going to tell him everything tonight, before morning, before the town is awake, and that cooperation is going to matter when Saturday comes." A pause. "Or you're going to stand here and argue with me, which is going to wake the Holts and half the street, and the story of tonight is going to be very different." A long moment. Then both men walked toward Calhoun's office. Caleb watched them go. Evelyn stood beside him in her coat over her nightgown, with her boots unlaced, because she had not taken time for laces, and she was breathing harder than the exertion justified, and she was looking at the gate they had not gotten through, and she was thinking about 43 pages of documentation locked in a box in Franklin Holt's study, and about how close the night had just come to going a completely different direction. "He sent them before we talked to Calhoun," she said. "Yes." Caleb's jaw was set. Before the morning, before he knew how far it had gone. He paused. "He sent the message early enough that they'd have been in position to destroy the records before Franklin got to his office. If you hadn't checked on me, if you hadn't woken up," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the gate. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes." "I have not done a good job," he said, "of being around people in recent years." "I know," she said. "I have done an excellent job," he said, "of being alone on a mountain and telling myself it was simpler." "I know that too." He looked at her. "I'd like to stop doing that," he said. The pre-dawn air was cool, and the town was still quiet, and somewhere a horse shifted in a stable, and the gate in front of Franklin Holt's house stood closed and intact. Evelyn looked at Caleb Walker, at the worn canvas jacket, and the face that showed what years of weather and silence do to a man who cares too much and believes he doesn't deserve to. And she thought about what Clara had said about 3 honest men in 30 years, and about a 17-year-old boy on a porch step, and about how the hardest thing is not finding the courage to stand in a store and place money on a counter, but finding the courage to stay afterward. "Then stop doing that," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Just like that," he said. "You've already stopped," she said. "You stopped the morning you walked past the fence wire." The ghost of something moved in his face, not quite the smile she had almost seen before, but closer, definitively closer. "You should go back inside," he said. "It's cold." "My boots aren't laced," she said. He looked down at her boots. Then slowly he crouched down and laced them. She did not say anything while he did it. She stood in the pre-dawn quiet of a town that was sleeping toward a reckoning. It didn't know was coming, and she looked at the top of Caleb Walker's head, bent over the task of lacing her boots with the same focused care he brought to everything. And she felt the thing she had put carefully away the night before come back up into the light where she could see it properly. It was not small. He stood. "Saturday," he said. "When the judge comes, I'm going to be in that room." "I know," she said. "And after Saturday," he stopped, started again. "I'd like to show you the ranch, if you want to see it, when things have settled." "I want to see it," she said. He nodded once. "Go inside," he said. "Sleep." "You too," she said. He touched the brim of his hat. She went, and Caleb Walker stood in the alley behind Clara Webb's property, in the last of the pre-dawn dark, and watched the light begin to come into the sky over the mountains he had been living in alone for 4 years, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not happy. Not yet. The machinery was too stiff for that to arrive all at once, but the specific and unmistakable feeling of a man who has been carrying something heavy in the wrong direction and has finally turned around. Saturday was coming, and Walter Grayson, in his jail cell 2 streets over, did not yet know that both of his men were now talking to Calhoun, and that 43 pages of documentation were locked and witnessed and sealed, and that a woman who had arrived in his town 36 hours ago, with a worn travel bag and a dead mother's necklace, had just in her unlaced boots, in the pre-dawn cold, secured the last piece of the case that would end him. He would know by morning, but by morning it would already be too late. Morning came to Willow Creek, the way mornings come, after something has broken quieter than usual, with a quality of held breath in it, as if the town itself was waiting to find out what it was, now that the thing it had accepted for 20 years was gone. Evelyn was at Franklin Holt's house by 7. She had slept 3 hours and felt it in her bones, but her mind was clear in the particular way it got when she was close to the end of something important, a sharpened clarity like the last few columns of a long calculation coming into focus. She had the 43 pages under her arm, and her notebook and her pencil, and she had redone her hair with more care than usual because she understood that today was the kind of day where being looked at was unavoidable, and she intended to be looked at correctly. Franklin opened the door before she knocked. "The circuit judge wired back," he said. "He'll be here by noon." She nodded. "And Walter's men?" "Calhoun has them. Both of them talked." Franklin stepped back to let her in. "Caleb came by an hour ago. He told me about last night." "It was close," she said. "Too close," Franklin said. "Calhoun should have been more careful." He paused. "He knows that now." Margaret was in the kitchen and produced coffee and did not fuss over Evelyn, which was the best possible thing she could have done. She simply set the cup down and said, "Eat something before the judge arrives," and put bread on the table, and that was the entirety of it. Evelyn sat and ate and went over the documentation one final time, while Franklin read it beside her, and between them, they found 2 small errors in her transcription numbers, transposed in the 83 column, and she corrected them in her small careful hand, and Clara's witness notation was still valid, because the correction was minor and initialed. By 9 o'clock, 6 families had arrived at the Holt house with their boxes. The Malones came first. Thomas and his father and his mother Sarah, who was a compact, precise woman who had indeed kept everything organized by year in a biscuit tin that she set on Franklin's table with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting a long time to be vindicated. The Belchers came next, then Ada Prentice in her good dress with a folder of papers that she held against her chest, the way you hold something you've been told isn't worth holding. 2 more families whose names Evelyn did not yet know, but whose faces carried the same expression, the particular look of people who have been walking around with a version of the truth and have just learned it was even more true than they thought. Evelyn went through each family's records with the same methodical attention she had given the ledgers. She cross-referenced. She noted. She added columns and checked them twice and wrote the results in the margin of her notebook. Thomas sat near the window and watched all of it. His mother at one point leaned over and said something quietly to him that Evelyn didn't hear. He nodded. Then he looked at Evelyn with an expression she would remember for a long time, a child deciding something permanent about what a person can be. Ada Prentice sat across the table from Evelyn while Evelyn went through her papers, and she was very quiet until Evelyn set down her pencil and said, "Mrs. Prentice, the debt Walter has been collecting on the original loan was legitimate, but the interest rate he applied was illegal under county statute, and he continued collection past the point of legal satisfaction." She paused. "Based on what you've paid since '82, he owes you $63. Ada Prentice looked at the table. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said very quietly, My husband told me before he died that he thought something was wrong with the numbers. He went to Walter, and Walter showed him paperwork and told him he'd miscalculated. A pause. Charles wasn't a numbers man. He believed him. Walter was counting on that, Evelyn said. Charles believed everybody, Ada said. It was his best quality and his worst one. She looked up. Her eyes were dry, but the effort of keeping them that way was visible. $63. Yes. That's... Ada stopped. That's nearly what I spend on supplies for the whole winter quarter. I know, Evelyn said. Ada pressed her lips together. Then she straightened in her chair and said, "What do I need to do?" "Sign this," Evelyn said, and slid a paper toward her. "And be in this room at noon when the judge arrives." "I'll be here?" Ada said. She signed the paper with a firm, clean signature that suggested whatever Charles had been Ada Prentice was absolutely a numbers woman. The morning moved. At 10, Caleb arrived. He came through the front door and looked at the room, the families at the table, the papers spread, Evelyn at the center of it all with her pencil and her notebook. And something in his face went quiet and steady in the way it did when he had decided about something. He sat down beside Evelyn and did not offer to help because he could see she did not need help. But he stayed, which was the thing she actually needed, and she registered his presence beside her, the way you register something solid when you've been standing in uncertain ground. "How are you?" he said quietly. "Finished," she said. "Almost." She turned a page. "Walter's lawyer, has he arrived?" "Stage came in at 8:30. Man named Prescott. He's at the hotel." "What do you know about him?" "Expensive suit," Caleb said. "Young. Confident the way young lawyers are confident when they haven't lost enough yet." "Has he spoken to Calhoun?" "He tried." Calhoun told him official visits start at noon with the judge present. Evelyn wrote a number in the margin. "Good." "Evelyn." She looked up. "Ruth is coming," he said. "My sister. She and her husband are riding in from their place. They should be here by 11. She looked at him. "I sent word last night," he said. "After," he paused. "After the boots." She held his gaze for a moment, and in that moment, something passed between them that did not require elaboration, the understanding of two people who have arrived by separate roads and separate losses at the same place at the same time, and have decided without ceremony to stay there. "I want to meet her," Evelyn said. "She wants to meet you," Caleb said. "She's been wanting to meet the woman who walked into Walter's store and didn't leave since I told her about it last night." "What did you tell her?" He was quiet for a second. "Everything," he said. She turned back to the ledger. "Good," she said. Ruth Walker arrived at 11:15. She was smaller than Evelyn had pictured, compact and dark-haired like Caleb, with the same quality of stillness, the same economy of movement. But where Caleb's stillness read as restraint, Ruth's read as precision. She came in with her husband, a quiet man named Daniel, and she looked around the room, and then she found Evelyn and crossed directly to her. "You're Evelyn Carter," she said. "I am," Evelyn said. Ruth looked at her for a moment with the frank, assessing look of a woman who has very little patience for performance of any kind. "My brother sent me a message at 10 last night," she said. "He told me what you found in the ledgers about our land. The $32. She paused. "He said I shouldn't come if I wasn't ready to sit in a room with the man who took it." "Are you ready?" Evelyn said. "I've been ready for 4 years," Ruth said. "I just didn't have the room." She looked at the papers on the table. "You built the room." "The numbers built the room," Evelyn said. "I just read them." Ruth sat down at the table. Daniel sat beside her. And Caleb, standing near the wall, watched his sister sit down in the room that had not existed yesterday, and he felt the thing he had been carrying for 4 years shift, not vanish, not disappear cleanly. The way guilt sometimes pretends it will, but shift, redistribute, settle into a different configuration that was finally possible to carry without it defining the entire shape of who he was. He looked at Evelyn. She was back at the ledger making a final note. She did not look up, but the corner of her mouth moved, very slightly, very precisely. He understood it was for him. The circuit judge arrived at 12:15. His name was Honorable Thomas Waverley, and he was 60-something with a completely unremarkable face, and the manner of a man who has heard every possible version of human dishonesty, and is no longer surprised by any of it, which was Evelyn thought exactly the right quality for this particular afternoon. He sat at Franklin's table, and he looked at the documentation, and he asked questions, precise, specific questions that went directly to the matters of legal relevance without detour. And Evelyn answered them in the same register, and Clara attested to the witness notations, and Franklin spoke to the provenance of the original ledgers, and Jim Pratt's written testimony was read and entered, and the families presented their receipts and their payment records and their memories. It took 2 hours. Walter Grayson's lawyer Prescott arrived 40 minutes in and made 3 objections in the first 10 minutes, all of which Judge Waverley overruled with the compressed efficiency of a man who has heard better objections. And then Prescott went quiet and started writing things down. Instead, which Evelyn read as the sign that he had looked at the documentation and was doing his own arithmetic. Walter himself was brought in at 2 o'clock. He looked smaller than he had behind his counter. That was Evelyn's first thought, and she recognized it as the thought you have when someone who occupied enormous space in your mind is placed in front of you in physical form. They are always smaller than the space they occupied. He was wearing the same clothes as yesterday, and his hair was disordered, and he looked for the first time since she had stood across a counter from him, like a man who understood that the situation was not going his way. He looked at the room. He looked at the families, the Malones and the Belchers, and Ada Prentice and the others. He looked at Ruth Walker and her husband Daniel, and something moved in his face that was more complicated than what he'd shown the rest of the room. Then he looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him with the steady, clear attention of someone who is done being afraid of what he will do next, because she has done the work of making sure that what he does next is no longer the deciding factor. He looked away first. Prescott leaned toward him and said something low and urgent. Walter listened with his jaw set and then said something back, and Prescott leaned away and wrote something in his notebook with the expression of a man updating his calculations. Judge Waverley set down the documentation and looked over his spectacles at the room. "I have reviewed the primary documentation," he said, "and the supporting family records and the written testimony of Mr. James Pratt. And I have heard the attested account of Miss Carter regarding both the methodology and the results of her analysis." He paused. "I want to ask the defendant a direct question." Walter said nothing. "Mr. Grayson," the judge said, "the ledger notation for the Walker land transaction in 1880, the debt listed as the basis for the forced sale, is written in your hand." "Yes," Walter said. His lawyer touched his arm. Walter ignored him. "Yes, it is." "And the original basis for that debt?" A pause. "A supply account," Walter said. "For what amount?" Longer pause. $32, Walter said. The room was completely silent. "And the amount listed in the ledger as the compounded debt used to force the land sale," Judge Waverley said, "is $161. Walter said nothing. "Which represents," the judge said, "an interest calculation of nearly 500% over 2 years. Prescott put down his pen. Walter looked at the wall. "I've seen a great many things in this courtroom," Judge Waverley said, and Franklin's parlor, Evelyn thought, had become a courtroom as fully as any built room in Colorado that afternoon. "But I have rarely seen documentation this complete, this clearly organized, or this comprehensively supported by independent verification." He looked at Evelyn. "Miss Carter." She looked at him. "This is exceptional work," he said simply. She said, "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge looked at Walter. What followed was not quick, and it was not clean, and it did not have the satisfying compression of stories that tidy themselves at the moment of verdict. The legal process was what it was: slow and procedural, and full of the specific friction of a man with a lawyer fighting every step of a ground he had already lost. Prescott argued jurisdiction and documentation provenance and the admissibility of Pratt's testimony, and Judge Waverly addressed each point with the compressed patience of experience, and the afternoon went long into the early evening before the preliminary rulings were entered, and the formal proceedings were scheduled for the following week in the county courthouse. But the preliminary rulings were clear. Walter Grayson was remanded to custody. The store and its assets were placed under court seal. The land transactions identified in the documentation were flagged for formal review, and Jim Pratt's cooperation was noted for the record. When it was over, the room moved the way rooms move after long, intense proceedings. People standing slowly stretching, speaking in low voices, the particular exhausted relief of people who have done something difficult and right. Ada Prentice stopped beside Evelyn on her way out. "The $63, she said. "I know it's caught up in the legal process now. It may be a while." "It will be sorted," Evelyn said. Ada nodded. Then she said, "My Charles would have liked you." A pause. "He liked people who read things carefully." She left. The Malone family stopped next. Thomas last behind his parents, and he looked at Evelyn and said with the formal gravity of a boy who has decided something fundamental, "Monday, 8 o'clock." "8 o'clock?" she confirmed. He left. Ruth Walker was the last. She stood in front of Evelyn and looked at her for a moment with that frank, precise assessment, and then she said, "The 40 acres." "The review process will take time," Evelyn said carefully. "I don't want to—" "I know," Ruth said. "I'm not asking about the land." She paused. "I lived 4 years watching my brother punish himself for something that wasn't his fault. He stopped eating supper with people. He stopped coming to town for anything that wasn't necessary. He spent every winter on that mountain alone because he decided that being alone was what he deserved." She looked at Evelyn directly. "Whatever you said to him or didn't say something changed." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "He said the same to me," she said, "about running." Ruth looked at her. "He told you to stop running," Evelyn said, "and you stopped." Ruth was quiet. "He needed someone to say it back," Evelyn said. Ruth pressed her lips together in an expression that was not quite a smile and was more than a smile. "Take care of him," she said. "He's not as hard as he looks." "I know," Evelyn said. "He laced my boots." Ruth blinked. Then she laughed a real laugh, brief and genuine, the laugh of a woman who has been waiting a long time for something to be funny again. She left with Daniel. Caleb was the last person in the room besides Evelyn and Franklin and Margaret. Franklin was gathering papers. Margaret was in the kitchen. The particular quiet of an emptied room after a full afternoon was settling over everything. Caleb crossed to where Evelyn was standing and stood beside her. "How do you feel?" he said. She thought about this seriously. "Like someone who just finished a very long calculation," she said, "and the numbers added up correctly." "Is that good?" "It's the best feeling there is," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "The ranch?" he said. "Yes. I meant what I said, about showing you." "I know you did." "There's a view from the upper pasture," he said. "In the morning, early before the light is fully up. The mountains from that angle?" He stopped. "I've been up there alone every morning for 4 years, and I've never had anyone to show it to." She looked at him. "That seems like a waste," she said. "It does," he agreed. She picked up her notebook, and her documentation, and her grammar book. Her mother's photograph still folded in the back. The 3 copied ledger pages, no longer necessary now that the originals were in Judge Waverly's hands. But still there, still carried, because she had carried them long enough that they felt like part of the grammar book's weight, and she was not yet ready to remove them. She settled the bag on her shoulder. "Sunday," she said. "I don't teach on Sundays." He looked at her. "Show me the view," she said. Something happened in his face then, fully. The smile arrived, not the ghost of it, not the forerunner, the actual thing, and it was not small or careful, It was the smile of a man who has been a long time in the cold and has just without quite expecting it come inside. "Sunday," he said. Franklin looked up from his papers on the other side of the room and caught Margaret's eye through the kitchen doorway, and Margaret made the small gesture with her chin that meant she had been watching and she was satisfied, and Franklin looked back at his papers with the expression of a man who has done a good day's work. Evelyn and Caleb walked out of the Holt house together into the evening air. The town was quiet. The soft quiet of a Friday evening in a small place that has had a very large day and is processing it in the privacy of its own kitchen tables and front porches. Somewhere down the street, a door opened and closed. Somewhere, a child was being called in for supper, the high, clear voice of a mother cutting across the dusk. They stood on the porch for a moment. "Clara's," Evelyn said. "I'll walk you," Caleb said. "It's 2 streets. I know how far it is." She did not argue. They walked through the evening with the comfortable silence of 2 people who have already said the important things and are not yet ready for the next important things, and are for this small stretch of time between those 2 points content to simply move through the same air at the same pace. At Clara's gate, Evelyn stopped. She turned to him. "Caleb?" "Yes." "The morning in the store," she said. "When you put the money on the counter. Before you knew any of it, the ledgers, the land fraud, the postmark, any of it. You didn't know who I was, or what I was involved in, or whether I was telling the truth about the letter." "No," he said. I just put the money down," he said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Why the real reason? Not the sister and the land and not again. The real reason in that moment." He was quiet for a second. "Because you didn't cry," he said. She blinked. "He called your mother's necklace worthless," Caleb said, "in front of a room full of people who were laughing, and you picked it up and you held it and you turned to leave and you didn't cry." He paused. "A woman who doesn't cry in that moment isn't weak. She's surviving, and a room full of people laughing at someone who's surviving." He stopped. "I couldn't walk past that." Evelyn stood at Clara's gate in the evening light and held her bag against her side and felt the thing that had been building since a morning in a store when a stranger put money on a counter fill up to its full size. At last, not gratitude, or not only gratitude, something larger and more permanent and with more future in it than gratitude. "My mother didn't cry either," she said. "When things were hard, she just kept going. She said you could cry later when there was time and privacy, and you weren't standing in the middle of something that needed finishing." She paused. "I've been doing that my whole life." "Has there been much time?" he said. "For the later part." She thought about it honestly. "Not much," she said. "But there have been moments." "Is this one?" She considered this. "No," she said. "This isn't a crying moment." "What kind of moment is it?" She looked at him for a long moment. "The kind," she said, "where things stop ending and start beginning." He held her gaze. Then he reached out and took the bag from her shoulder briefly, just long enough to take the weight of it, and then he gave it back. It was a small gesture. It meant nothing and everything in the way that small gestures mean nothing and everything when they're the right gesture at the right moment between the right people. "Sunday," he said. "Sunday," she said. She went inside. He stood at the gate for a moment in the blue evening, with the mountains sitting large and quiet on the horizon, the way they always did and always would. Permanent and indifferent and beautiful, in the specific way that beautiful things are beautiful when you finally have someone to notice them alongside you. Then he walked back through the town. He walked past Walter Grayson's store with its court seal on the door. He walked past the schoolhouse where the oilcloth window was going to need replacing before Monday, and he made a note to bring glass from the ranch. He walked past the spot on the sidewalk where he had stopped Evelyn Carter with a woman's name and a piece of information about the school board chairman being out of town, which had been such a small thing, such a simple and unmemorable thing, and had somehow been the first step of everything. He thought about the 43 pages, about Ruth's face when she sat down at the table, about Thomas Malone's initials carved deep into a doorframe, about 8 apprentices, $63, and the way she had signed her name with a firm, clean signature. He thought about a woman at a counter who did not cry. He walked up the street and out of town toward the ranch trail. And the evening was the kind of evening that settles into a man and stays there. The kind that you carry going forward, not as a memory exactly, but as a changed thing in the foundation of yourself. Something that was put there that evening and is permanent now, and will be there every morning you wake up for the rest of your life. On Sunday, at the first gray light before sunrise, Evelyn Carter rode up the mountain trail to Caleb Walker's ranch, which she had not seen, and which would she already knew become familiar, in the way that places become familiar when you are going to choose them. The upper pasture was exactly as he had described it, or rather, it was beyond description in the specific way that views are beyond description, because description is language, and what she was looking at was pure space and light, and the kind of scale that makes a person understand usefully how large the world is, and how fortunate they are to be standing in it at all. She stood and looked. Caleb stood beside her. Below them in the valley, Willow Creek was waking up. Smoke from morning fires, the sound of a rooster. The early movement of a town going about the business of its own life changed now in ways it would continue discovering for months and years. The families who would get their land reviewed, the widow who was owed $63, the boy who would be in school on Monday, the people who had laughed in a store and would carry that quietly and differently now. The light came up over the mountains. It came the way light always comes indifferent to human events, reliable past all human reliability purely and completely itself, and it fell across the pasture and across the two people standing in it. And it was enough. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and took out her mother's necklace. She had been wearing it, but she had taken it off that morning in the gray dark of her room at Clara's, and held it in her hand for the walk up, because she had wanted to feel the weight of it, the specific warm weight of sterling silver in a closed fist. She held it up for a moment in the new light. It caught. It was not flashy, not ornate, a plain oval setting with a small engraved border. The kind of thing a woman buys because she loves it, and not because anyone will be impressed by it. But in the morning light, it caught and held the light with the calm certainty of something that knows its own worth and has never needed anyone else to name it. She put it back on. A person's worth is not named by the loudest voice in the room. It is not named by the man behind the counter with the smile that thinks it owns everything, or the crowd that laughs because laughing is easier than standing still, or the town that has practiced silence long enough to call it peace. It is named by the things you carry when you have nothing else, by the receipts you keep, and the columns you build, and the door frames you carve your initials into because you need proof that you were here and that you mattered, by the money placed on a counter without a word about the cost, by the boots laced in the pre-dawn cold, by the view you walk someone up a mountain to show them, because you have been saving it for years, waiting without knowing you were waiting for a person worth showing it to. Evelyn Carter had arrived in Willow Creek, Colorado, with a worn travel bag and a dead mother's necklace and the word of a school board letter that someone had tried to use against her. She was still here. She was still here, and the necklace was sterling, and the numbers had told the truth, and the right people had been in the room to hear it. That was enough. That was, in the end, exactly enough.